Okay, so I don't know what the audio is going to be like. I'm just using it in the GoPro. I didn't feel like syncing audio and all that bullshit. But yeah, here's the table so far. So it's got to be sanded. I put some more epoxy on top to fill in some of these little gaps and chunks that got torn out when the whole surface was leveled. So I filled those in with more epoxy, and the underside's the same way. I didn't add more epoxy on the underside, and you can probably hardly see it, but there are these little bubbles and cracks in here from when the surface was leveled. And I'm not sure if I'm gonna really mess with it on the underside, because you can't really see through the epoxy, you know? It's clear on the top, but not all the way through. So I'm just gonna have to see how it looks when it's cleaned up. But yeah, I gotta take this outside, so I'll open up the door, and I got the respirator and I have the sander over there, so yeah, it's probably not gonna be that bad. It should go pretty smoothly because it's you got the pun. And then I have to take out and square this thing up. So there's a bunch of gunk and crap on the edge on both sides. So I gotta take the saw and just kind of cut off probably around 1/2 inch on both sides. I oversized it by about 1 inch, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just gotta get done, you know? Okay, so at this point, I got the entire table sanded on both sides. I mean, the back side I didn't sand too well, but it doesn't really matter. No one's ever gonna see it. So, top of it's sanded. I wiped it down with some denatured alcohol. That'll help bring out the dust. And now I'm just gonna trim up the edges so you can see that it's got a ton of crap. It's not square, so I got a square here, and I'm using this as a reference, so this is gonna be the reference edge. It's probably the most straight part of this table right now. So just kind of lining it up. It's not perfect because the table's not really perfect because I don't have the equipment to do it right. But I got this straight edge here, and that's probably not too straight, but that's used as a guide for the circular saw here, and you can see the saw lines up with the edge of the wood here, the straight edge, and then you got the blade, and it's just taking off a little bit, so I'm not trying to take off too much material because I like the width of the table, but it'll trim it up so this whole edge will be square, and then got to repeat the same thing on the other side. So let's go for it. So I took off the perfect amount. We're just a hair over on the entire thing. Like in this area there was almost no material that got took off, and that was pretty good for just kind of eyeballing it. But you can see the epoxy here. So it was poured in 2 stages, we'll call it. So this first one is it was just a powder, a mica powder, so you can't really see through it too well, but the top, it's actually it's easier to see on this side. It's pretty opaque, and it's hard to see that because of the saw marks on the other side, but it's definitely a lot more clear than the bottom. So if I put my hand back there, you can kind of see the 2 layers, and you can't really see it anymore on the table, but once it gets sanded and cleaned up, it'll be a lot easier to see. So now we just got to do the same thing on the other side. And here's the same thing. You can kind of see the bit there. Didn't take off a whole lot. Didn't need a whole lot taken off. So now it's got a relatively square edge. You can double check it with the square. And the square fits in there pretty nicely. It's not caught like anywhere, so that's a pretty squared edge according to this angle. I mean, this square may not be perfectly square anymore because it's pretty old. It's seen some better days, but this side isn't nearly a square. You can see there's a bit of a gap there. I hope you can see it. I can't really tell if it's focusing or not, but there's a gap. It's about I don't know, 32nd of an inch off, and that's perfectly fine for this project. But yeah, so now I'm just gonna sand it all again, probably just at 100 grit, and then move up through the different grits and hopefully get this thing all ready to be finished. All right, so before I go back and sand it, gotta put in these little adapters. They're going underneath it, and then a bolt goes inside of here. So this gets screwed into the wood, and then a bolt goes through here to hold the table surface to the desk frame, which is right here. So I'm currently mocking it up and trying to get a rough idea of where I'm gonna put these inside of the wood. First, we're gonna do a test piece. So I have a cut off from this board right here. So I'm gonna drill a hole. I found a bit that I think should work. Haven't tested it though, so I don't really know. I put this tape here. So anytime you're doing a drill, like drilling through where it's not all the way through, always mark out how far you wanna go in terms of depth. And I determined that this is a pretty good length for me. So it's not gonna go all the way through the wood, and you can test it. Do a double check over here, so we're definitely safe. We're only gonna go in about halfway into the board, so we're just gonna give it a shot and see how it goes. Okay. From the test piece, the test hole, I learned that this bit's probably a little too small. I got really tight to try to screw this in, and what I don't want is for the wood itself to crack in any sort of way. That'd be really bad. I don't think it will, because the ash isn't the super hardest. It's not crazy hard, so it might just deform, but we don't want to risk it, so I won't be lazy and I'll get a bigger bit. All right, so we got a bigger bit and drilled a hole. Then I screwed the threaded adapter. Shoot, they're just called furniture screws, I guess. Put it in, so it's pretty much flush with the top. You can't even, barely comes up. So we're gonna put, I think it's 8 of these. Yeah, it's 4 on each side, on the underside of the table, but I don't think it's exposed correctly. I don't know if it will. I don't know if it'll expose correctly, so yeah, just gonna mark it out. I have the table on here how I want it. Just gonna double check. I have this machinist square, and go in here and check it's almost touching, and we go around to the other side. It is touching, so it's just a little bit off center, but I think it's gonna be pretty much good enough for this project. And then we're using the back as a reference. This kind of got messed up, so it's not super square on the back side, but going corner to corner and kind of just seeing down the line, it's lined up with the back of here, and you can see it comes over because this isn't super flat, and I'm kind of mad at myself for it, but it's okay. I can't cut off any more, or I don't want to. I'd lose like 1/4 of an inch plus, and it's just not worth it. So we're gonna live with it a little bit wobbly in the back here, but from a distance and from up top, you can't even tell. So I'm gonna, got my Sharpie here, and we're just gonna mark out where all these holes are. kind of a loop, try to get the whole thing, give me an idea of where it's at. These ones on the edge are kind of nerve-wracking, but I think it'll be fine. Now you could theoretically do this all off of measuring, but it's just not nearly as fast, and there's a lot more room for error when you start measuring. So sometimes just using the pieces as they are is gonna give you the best result. So again, just going up all 4 of these, putting a mark, try to get the whole area so I know, can figure out where the center is when I actually go to drill these. Luckily none of it's on the epoxy, and if there was, I'd probably just skip it because I don't want to be drilling into that. So 1, 2, 3, 4 marks, and I believe on the other side all 4 are marked. So we're gonna flip the table over and then drill these holes. Sorry if it's ever a little like wobbly or whatever, but like off center, off axis. You can see the 4 on each side, so you gotta drill them all to screw in those adapters. Okay. So we got the 4 adapters in here, and this just allows me to use bolts to hold down the table instead of screws. So anytime you want to take this tabletop off and put it back on, you don't have to worry about stripping the hole. If you use screws, you kind of have to worry about that, and this is just a bit stronger and I'd say more professional of a solution. Sometimes you can't do this because your piece is going to be too thin, but I got like 1.5 inches here to work with, so it's pretty much the right way to do it for this project. Not every project, but this one, it is the right thing to do. We're going to do the same thing on the other side, but I'm not going to bore you with it, and then we're going to flip it over and make sure it works. Look, now your rack fell off.
Go the fuck in.
There are at least 15 screws down.
What's this?
There's so many screws down there now. Gotta clean off the dust. I told you. Alright, so calling an audible last minute, what we're gonna do is do a flood coat of epoxy over the entire table and then sand it down. So I leveled it up, so table's level. If you can see, this way in that direction, and this axis also level. I don't know if you can see, but it is level, so that means we can pour the epoxy, and it's just going across the entire thing. So the entire table is getting covered. Hopefully it can drop down on the sides, all four edges, and then that'll seal the entire top and sides, and then probably gonna flip it over and then pour the bottom another day after it hardens. So yeah, kind of a bit of a change in the plans, but I think it'll be really cool and pretty unique when it's finished. At this point, we just go for it. Got all these cardboard boxes on the ground so I don't drip on the cement. Just gonna get a lot of epoxy all over the place, and then we're gonna use a little spreader to spread it all around. Hopefully this is enough. I mean, I didn't put a whole ton, so hopefully we can stretch this 8 ounces to the entire thing, because I don't want a thick coat. That's the last thing I need, is a thick coat of epoxy. I just want it really thin, enough to cover everything. So, scraper, sorry. Turn the screen on. This looks way cooler in person, I can almost guarantee it. It probably doesn't translate all that great into GoPro footage in a somewhat poorly lit shop, but this is super awesome that I've come this far and it hasn't gone poorly. So a lot of times I run into struggles and setbacks in these projects, but this one's gone so smooth, and I might be jinxing myself by saying that, but it really has, like, up until to this point, because that's something that can't change. It has gone super well, and I mean, I had to really call back and remember a lot of the stuff from high school that I learned about woodworking, but it all seemed to come back pretty naturally. It's kind of like riding a bike, you know? You don't really forget these things, but you're not doing it perfect at the same time. Like, there's always stuff to remember, little things along the way. But that's just kind of how everything is in life. You know, you can't just always be good at something. You have to constantly practice it. And I have not been practicing any sort of woodworking, at least to this level, in quite a while. Because I consider this a bit higher level than the average person, or like a small little weekend project. This is a pretty hefty project, if I'm being completely honest. If I didn't know everything that I knew beforehand, like coming from multiple years of learning about woodworking in high school, I don't necessarily know if I would have been able to do this. There would have been some major issues and a lot of stuff to learn along the way. Like, for this, I actually haven't been having to learn a whole bunch along the way, because I came in knowing the majority of it. And I think that's the difference between, like, being self-taught and just kind of like thinking you can do something because you read about it or watched videos, versus having prior knowledge. The prior knowledge is really the absolute killer. Matt? Am I done yet? No. I'm done sanding for now, but not done it. What do you think?
I still feel like it feels thin for how long it is.
Don't say thin. You're not even talking about thickness, you're talking about width or depth.
depth feels small for how long it is.
But the reality of the situation is that it has gotten thinner since the last time. No, thinner. Like, not narrower, thinner. Because I had to take a lot of material off.
Same with the shit.
No, I used the router and I flattened the entire
Get
thing.
these edges, brother.
What? What do you mean? Yeah, I haven't gotten there yet. I just did this.
Down on my finger.
Idiot. I just poured it. Yeah.
How are you gonna get this all even?
It's a self-leveling epoxy, so theoretically... Look, I was talking to the camera, now I can just talk to you. So theoretically, the epoxy should self-level, but...
Is the thing itself actually fucking level?
Yeah, I leveled it beforehand. And that's something I was talking about earlier, like, a lot of those small things you don't necessarily think of, but because I've done it before, I already know what...
Well, I feel like
Not
checking to make
to
sure the
do.
table's level itself is a self-explanatory thing.
I mean, it is, but it's easy to overlook.
Well, if it's self-leveling, and the thing itself needs to be level, because it's gonna level itself off, however level it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
True. No, like it... Yeah. It's a self-leveling epoxy. Now, I don't have it down, like, level to, like, an insane degree, just because the level that I have kind of sucks. No,
I know.
because I'm sanding it. I'm just gonna sand it. I want it like a matte finish, which is kind of why I'm doing this. Like, I really didn't expect to be, because I don't want it glossy. I want it to be matte, but I want this a very even and like the same feel across the entire table, whether it's the epoxy or the wood, because as it was, the epoxy was super smooth and the wood was wood. It was rough. Like, it wasn't...
Wood is gonna feel like wood.
Yeah, so that's not what I want. I want this like super premium, high-end feel to the table. And I don't know if... I don't have the sanding equipment needed to get it like to like 1,000 grit,
Well, you're gonna
like
need to use
very
at least,
well,
like, a couple thousand
or
grit, and then
3,000
like I'm telling
grit.
you, polish it. The polishing, yeah, it's not gonna give it that matte finish, but it's gonna get it to that high gloss that you like, the high-end feeling you want. And you know I'm right.
I don't think you know, Matthew. You've never actually done woodworking. Slapping stuff together at the folk festival. is woodworking.
I'm never gonna count that as woodworking, but I know enough to know that a polishing is the like a higher grit than sanding. If you polish it for a while, it will come out smooth.
The wood won't because it has grain. So you actually have to sand it all
wood, you're
down.
polishing the epoxy coating you're putting on right now.
Well, that's a whole different thing. Then.
Well, the thing is, you said you want the high-end feel. The high-end feel is going to come from when you
No,
smooth the
see the
epoxy out.
epoxy, if you sand it too high, it's gonna get too smooth, and it won't have that same feel as...
That's what I'm saying.
What I was
polishing,
feeling
'cause the
earlier.
polishing will just take out a lot of the imperfections.
No, I already had it perfect. I sanded it to 600 grit, and it was like exactly what I'm looking for. So I just have to put this on, let it harden, and then sand it to 600 grit again. So kind of got to redo a bunch of work.
If you take too much off the process,
Well,
you need to reduce it.
yeah, I just can't get through it. It'll be fine.
600 grit is easy to go through.
What?
600 grit isn't that high.
600 grit is very high. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, it is. 600 grit's pretty high. Like, that's higher than you sand most things.
You sand most things to like 300, 400.
400's a pretty common number.
What?
400's a pretty common number for what most people go to.
Yeah, but not for a table like this one.
How would you know?
Because I've been to buying tables like this, and they're stupid expensive.
Yeah, because look how much work I've poured into this. I'm multiple days in.
You offered to do it.
Yeah, I know. I'm really loving it. But I'm just saying, there's a reason why
It's
it's
like
so
learning how to do
expensive.
stuff and having to pay for it.
That's also true. I don't have the budget to do it.
Super.
Because I'm broke.
You
phone. Epoxy's kind of going everywhere, and I'm sorry that I haven't been focusing on where I'm pointing the camera. You know, I'm just trying to watch what I'm doing and hoping the camera follows me. But I know I'm in charge of it, so it's really on me if it's not all centered up. But it should have a pretty wide angle on it. I dropped my scraper again. So, gotta go around and make sure there's, I dropped it again, even coat of epoxy on everything. Like, it's gonna get sanded down, so it's not mission critical, but do want to make sure, do want to save time late by not having to sand that much later. You know, it'd just be annoying to spend so long sanding this all again, because I spent like 4 hours today, with 3 hours today sanding. The majority of my day was spent sanding, basically. And I don't really care to do that again. I'm not a big fan of sanding, and I never have been. Which is why my own epoxy table is still not done, because I got to the step of sanding the whole thing, and I just haven't done it. But if I put the same effort I put in today on this table onto that one, it would be done. Almost guaranteed. But going back to, I sure hope I'm not stepping in all this epoxy and tracking it everywhere. That would be bad. But to bring back those little screw bolt adapters, my table is actually too thin to use them. So my own desk surface or coffee table, whatever, I'm not sure what I'm doing with it yet. Probably coffee table. We'll say coffee table. So mine is so thin, like the thickness here is half this. So mine's only 3/4 of an inch. This is about 1.5 inches, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't remeasured it since I planed the whole thing and leveled the surface, which would have been cool to see, but I was at another person's house doing it, so yeah, I couldn't really record it, which kind of bummed about, but it's okay. But anyways, mine's just too thin to use those little metal pockets with the, what's it called? It's for the bolts. So I'm just gonna have to use screws in mine, or come out with a clever solution. But like, this looks awesome. Especially here. This is probably my favorite part of the table, and I'm sure it'll be most people's favorite part. It's just super unique and interesting, and I'll scrape the excess epoxy out. So yeah, I mean, just kind of cleaning this up, and then we're gonna go over with the torch, and hopefully that takes out some of the bubbles, but there aren't many. My hand is covered in epoxy. So, got the glove off, putting it in the trash. I'm done with it. And now we're getting torch. I also don't know why I've been wearing this respirator the whole time. I haven't needed it for hours now, but I just don't really have a spot for this one, so I'm probably gonna have to wash it and then put it in a little Ziploc bag. But torch right here, and it's not super eventful. You might not be able to see, but there's little bubbles on the surface, and that's what the torch is getting out. So I think I'm gonna have to get another coat of epoxy after this, probably tomorrow, because I can see that it's getting really pulled in through the wood here because it's very porous. It's absorbing a lot of the epoxy. So once it does that, then I'm just gonna have to put more epoxy on top and it'll all be okay. It's just gonna be another pour, more work. So yeah, that's kind of about it for tonight. I think it came a long way, and it actually looks really, really much like a table would. It's almost done, and I'm super, super stoked about that. Like, this is really, really awesome. So yeah, have a good one.